Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of Nutanix Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I got one of my main guys with me right now, and the other one's going to show up here in a few minutes when he gets back from picking up his daughter at dance class. I think that's what it was called. So Jirah's with me. Jirah, how's it going?
Good, man. Still a quorum.
Yeah,
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
In fact, he's texting me right now. Must be caught in traffic, but we'll make fun of it. We'll make fun of him while he's not here. He drives a Tesla. He probably ran out of gas.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Hey, so I had an interesting moment about 2 hours ago. One of your new salespeople, new to the area, but not new to Nutanix, Cindy George, called me from Texas, and I was able to point her to these podcasts. She's now the new Dallas rep for you guys, commercial rep. And I was able to point her to this podcast and talk about, hey, this will do a good job of telling you who XenTegra is and our love for the hyperconverged space and how hyperconverged fits the Citrix world. And literally while I'm on the phone with her, she's sitting there going through all the different podcasts we've done and talking about, hey, this is perfect. I need this one for this customer and this one for that customer. So just validation that what we're doing here is making sense and it's gonna work and help people.
That's fantastic. Hi, Cindy.
Yeah. Do you know Cindy by chance?
I don't. I probably will one day, I guess.
No, you should. She's a character, I think. I think she would love that I call her a character. All right. So the blog that we're going to review today is from Ruben Sprutit. Did I say that right?
Ruben, yes. I'm going to say Sprout?
Sprout?
Just a guess.
Right.
I will get clarification.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody will let us know. And his blog is Top 5 DaaS, Desktop as a Service Mistakes, and how to avoid them. It's interesting. I mean, I read a lot of cloud books, and there's IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service. There's PaaS, Platform as a Service, and then there's one of the oldie goldies, or probably the oldie goldie, which is SaaS, Software as a Service. Every once in a while, somebody throws in the Desktop as a Service, which is really just somebody making desktops available to clients or to internal resources. And by desktops, we mean typically Windows 10, sometimes Server 2019, and even more rare Linux desktops. But it gives people that platform to work from, which is their own kind of digital footprint that they can then go and do other things. I got a quote here from John Kennedy: "A rising tide lifts all boats." And I think what he's talking about here is the fact that what you and I talked about before we got started is the idea that desktop as a service things to know apply whether you're using Nutanix Frame, Citrix Virtual App and Desktop, VMware Horizon. There's lots of the same mistakes. And I'll tell one story and then I'll shut up. Went to a Citrix conference one time and they did a breakout session on how to optimize Windows 10. And then at the end, they did like one slide on how to optimize Server 2016 at the time, or 2012 at the time. And that's because the server's already optimized. So, turning off things like Candy Crush, you didn't have to worry about it at that time because the server just didn't have it. Yeah,
there's so much inside modern Windows that, just has got to get disabled. It feels like to me, right? I mean, you guys live this day in, day out. I'm sure I touch on it like once a quarter, right? When I just encourage customers, hey, get a smart guy in here to get your base Windows 10 image like pruned, because it needs a lot of pruning, fresh out of the box.
Right. And Jirah, that's what I was going to ask you next, is how foreign is this concept of desktop as a service to you guys? I'm sure you run into it, but you're really the guy who gives it the horsepower, right?
Yeah, so I think for this one, right, to sort of set the scope, so DaaS versus like VDI is primarily about like who owns the infrastructure, right? Who owns and manages like hypervisor and storage presentation and capacity and all stuff like that. DaaS is intentionally abstracting that out, right, and saying if I want 100 desktops, I get 100. If I want 1,000, I get 1,000. Yeah. I don't care if you run that on one host or 20. Right, I'm paying on a per desktop basis, right? So from a per desktop sizing perspective, probably not very different, right? Because either way, we're going to either put one or many users on one OS instance, whether it's VDI or DaaS. Just about, do I care about the bottom layer or not?
Right. This kind of goes hand in hand a little bit with what we talked about with, drawing a blank now. A couple weeks ago, the sizing, not Jirah, but.
Oh, Jarian.
Jarian. Damn.
Yep.
I just did his name like 5 minutes ago. I'm going to say it one more time. He's going to show up like Beetlejuice. Speaking of showing up, it looks like Harvey finally found some gas and got home in his Tesla and didn't have. So So Harvey, I told the listeners that you ran out of gas on the way home from picking up your daughter at dance or whatever it was. And
nice.
Truth is, you just forgot to plug in, just like I forgot to plug in my iPhone last night.
On my Amazon was offering me like a little like three-piece fold-out USB solar charger. You can just put that on your dashboard, plug the car into that, right? Just get on home.
I think it's more so everybody else wasn't electrified, so they weren't moving fast enough.
There you go.
Well, I'm still driving a F-150 myself, so I've got a couple more years before I step up to the electric class. Even though I think there's a hybrid F-150 that's out now or coming out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if it's out yet, but I know that there is a lot of talk about that.
And a Tesla truck, I think, too.
Topic.
Tesla truck on the horizon, too.
Yes.
Nah, I don't know if I can go for that being a truck. I'm not sure what that is. It's like a wing with a bed in the back of it. I'm not sure what that is.
I don't. I definitely. We're so off topic. I definitely wouldn't mind entertaining like just a polished stainless steel finish, though. That seems really interesting from like a maintenance and long-term durability standpoint.
Yeah. Well, Harvey, we were just getting ready to jump into the blog and talk about some of the 5 biggest mistakes. I think it's a 5-part series, the blog is, that Ruben put together. And the first one talks about sizing. Harvey, you've got horror stories, right, for sizing desktops?
Oh, gosh. Do I?
I know one that comes to mind, a small trucking company not too far from here that took our recommendations, gave them to another partner, and then bought half as much and then blamed us. Remember that one?
Yes. This isn't the one where you're going to share video, right?
I'm still waiting to file an ethics complaint on that one. That was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Hey, but I would say that sizing is important.
Which actually, goes to the first point: lack of context.
Yeah, lack of context. Hey, so I would say that desktop as a service or just VDI sizing, it has gotten a lot better with cloud. That's one aspect, but it's also gotten a lot better with the foundation of what built the cloud, which is hyper-converged. I got a funny story, or maybe it's not funny, but I tried to introduce Nutanix to an insurance company one time, and the guy running the project said, "Don't bother bringing it up." The CIO and somebody from EMC are next door neighbors. They're going to spend $2 million on 3-tier architecture, no matter what, even if it is a bad idea. Hyperconverged allows us, at least gives us the opportunity to get it wrong and resize it without breaking the bank in the beginning or the end or both.
Interesting approach. Yes. That is a true statement, although it makes me cringe just a little bit.
No, these guys bought, I think it was 1.2 million in EMC, and they were already at year 3 of that hardware and only had about 500 total desktops rolled out. They were never going to get to where they could justify that big spend they had on EMC. Never going to get there.
Wow. I'm curious what that per desktop price looks like. 1 second.
Yeah. You calculate that all you want. It's not, whatever it is, it ain't good.
Whew, $2,400 bucks per desktop on apparently storage alone. That's amazing.
That crazy?
I mean, as we all think about, past things we've proposed with a per desktop, breakdown, that's interesting. There'd be a lot of sandbox to play in if we were going to design for $2,400 per user worth of solution.
So guys, Ruben jumps into the article after the intro and talks about why would you even do desktop as a service? And a lot of this is going to apply to the virtual app, virtual desktop, VDI world. First one says, delivers a consistent user experience regardless of location. And for the most part, that's true. Obviously, if you're on the moon trying to access this stuff, you got a little latency. But for the most part, it won't be as good as maybe a freshly configured Windows 10 $1,500 Mac or Windows 10 PC. But for the most part, it's pretty good no matter where on earth you're at these days, as long as you have, let's say, well, let me ask Harvey that question. Harvey, what's my latency threshold? Because remember, bandwidth isn't really my problem. It's packet loss and latency that's my problem. Harvey, at what point does the latency get high enough that in like a Citrix HDX protocol or VMware Blast world, do I start to get concerned about a degraded user experience? What's your take on that?
I guess as a general rule, I would say around 200 is where I would expect things to be different. I guess, a lot more detail around what they're doing and, things like that. I guess very much generalized 200 would be my line. If you're over 200, we got to have some real conversations.
All right. I'm going to challenge that in a second. Jirah, you got any thoughts on this topic, or are we so out of your league?
No, it's fine. Out of the gate, right? I'll trust you guys on the whole, like, this is the threshold of where, good turns into less good, turns into sucky. But I think the emphasis at this point is that entertaining a DaaS strategy gives you the flexibility to say, let's say my radius is 200 milliseconds. Well, now I need to land my desktops, right, within 200 milliseconds of my user base. And looking at a DaaS approach lets me think about how do I turn up desktops in cloud availability zones more easily than landing a data center and a colo and a cabinet and infrastructure in all those locations, right? So if I needed to put 5 desktops in every country in Europe, I can do it with a couple of clicks on the right credit card versus having to go and get a bunch of desktop contracts for colos to get all those in the right latency locations.
So that's a good point too, and I guess it makes me start clarifying what I was saying. My 200 generalized estimate is from the client to the machine and back, a round trip time.
Oh, so 100 one way, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I mean, yeah, it's a conversation.
So let me try real quick. So my threshold is 80 milliseconds and below. I can have a really good experience.
One way or round trip?
80 to 120, I get degraded a little bit, but it's still a pretty good experience. When I get 120 to 200, all of a sudden it becomes less of an experience, and it really is how valuable is it to you to have this solution. And then anything above 200, I start to think, well, maybe it's not worth it, but it still works. Don't get me wrong. You're talking to a guy who did all this stuff over dial-up modems 25 years ago. Almost 25 years ago. So my point in that is it's come a long way. And even back then it worked pretty good. And then maybe we talked on this podcast, maybe a different one, but the fact that we now use UDP and we fall back to TCP if necessary, all that makes it even better. But my short answer is at anything below 80, just rock on. Your users probably aren't even going to know the difference these days.
And are you talking about round trip time or one way?
I guess I'll say round trip time because I'm doing pings and getting the round trip time from that. So 80 milliseconds round trip time. And guys, keep in mind on most LANs and WANs and even remote access connections these days, you're below 80 milliseconds round trip time. It's really gotten pretty good. I mean, think about how much bandwidth you have in your pocket and latency associated with that just from jumping on your hotspot on your phone.
Yeah, no, fully agreed.
All right, so back to the idea behind this. Why would you even be doing desktop as a service or VDI? It's because it delivers a consistent user experience, and that's how I got into that whole network protocol. It depends on where you're sitting at that moment, but for the most part, it looks and feels similar if you're using a desktop that's provided over a protocol, and that's really the goal here. Is maybe it's not the most optimal, but it's consistent, and you know what you're going to get, right?
Yep.
The second topic he has here, which is a no-brainer, especially in the world of this pandemic and beyond, and that's enhanced security posture. We're working with a managed services security service team, and for the most part, I get on with their leadership, and I try to tell them that Citrix and remotely accessing something without a VPN that has a lot of controls and analytics associated with is a major security play. It takes a little convincing, but eventually I get them on my side. But if you're looking at this through the right pane of glass, the fact that you deliver something versus deploy something over a protocol without a VPN that doesn't open the door to a lot of other stuff, at least not through the protocol itself, is a heck of a security play. You guys seen that?
Oh, for sure, right? I think we can all picture, well, it's been a year now, right? A lot of people sent people home. Here's your laptop, here's your VPN. Oh, by the way, we got to dramatically increase the size of our VPN appliances and concentrators, or buy a lot more licenses, or both. And fundamentally, you're solving the problem, but you're moving that data out to the edge compared to, I mean, we've all seen military environments or in a movie, right? Where it's like, oh, you have to be in this room to use that computer and get to the data that it can get to.
Right.
And DaaS or VDI solutions let you sit at home and still get that kind of effect of that data's over there, and I literally can't put it on my machine if I tried to, short of taking out my phone and taking a picture of my screen.
So true or false? Edward Snowden would not have been able to steal all the data he stole if he was limited to a Citrix virtual desktop. Harvey?
I will say it could be true if they did what they should do. How about that?
Right. If they would have disabled the ability to download files locally through your desktop, Citrix desktop, for example.
Correct.
Had to take a picture of every single document, every single page of every single document that he stole.
Correct.
He just had full-blown access to it and just downloaded it right to wherever he downloaded it to.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely, this is absolutely a security play because it does everything a bank does with money, right? You stick it in the vault and you protect the vault. You don't have it like spread out everywhere. I mean, that would be the equivalent of just having everything just out, and you protect every dollar bill instead of protecting a vault.
And a better example of that is actually not the vault, it's the safety deposit box where, yes, it's one big vault, but inside there's little bitty boxes where you compartmentalize and isolate things.
Yeah, you got to be in the right room to get to that compartment of data. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys can tell I think about this a lot.
No, for sure. No, I mean, like picture this is your bag to hold, right? This is your job at the organization is security.
Yep.
You get two kinds of emails. One is I lost my Chromebook, had nothing on it. And you get the email that says, I lost my ThinkPad. Yes, it was encrypted. Which one of those are you going to lose more sleep over?
Right.
Absolutely.
You're exactly right.
All right. So we haven't even got to the meat of this thing yet, but the next one is onboarding and offboarding. We've got 6 people at XenTegra we're hiring this week or this month. And I found out a while ago we were giving each of them like all the different URLs they had to go to do their job. And I said, no, just have them go to XenTegra.cloud.com and log into their digital workspace, and then all of their stuff will be there. We're not eating our own dog food, drinking our own champagne, but we've got to. And once you start doing that, you realize, hey, it's a lot better when you do it that way and you onboard and offboard people that way.
Yes, agreed. There's a reason why we talk about it all the time.
Yeah. And then here's a great one. So centralized workspace management, one of our leaders here in the company a while ago said, well, that's just like having a desktop. I was like, well, when you had your desktop, were all the icons there when you got it the first time? Were all the URLs saved as favorites? Like, no, they weren't.
Nope.
This allows you to do all that without having to, do it, organically over time. Scale down, scale up. We've got lots of customers who've had to scale up and they're starting to scale down a little bit. It'll be interesting over the course of the next few months with the hybrid workforce, what happens there. And then significantly reduce operational overhead compared to managing a traditional VDI. If everybody in the company was using XenTegra.cloud.com right now, and I needed to change our, I don't know, whatever we use for some specific application, I just go in and remove one, add the other. I just move the entire company to the new platform without having to make a single phone call or tell anybody. And, not tell anybody, but I could communicate even through this platform, but I don't have to tell them all to bring in their laptop and let me do something to it or remote into it somehow.
Right.
All right. I guess you guys are all sold on VDI or desktop as a service, right?
Yeah, I am. I mean,
yeah, for sure. Right. And a lot of those were just helping readers understand like DaaS versus VDI, right? And like considerations for that. From here, we launch into actual sizing stuff, which is kind of coming to both.
Right.
And that was really DaaS virtual desktops, which, by the way, Jirah, I'm adamant about not using the term VDI unless it truly is a Windows 10. If it's a server desktop, then we call that a server desktop or
server-based computing. Yeah. No, I love the specificity.
RDSH, whatever. And then there's also part of that conversation was just the concept of a digital workspace in general. And I think we just covered all 3 of those in combination while talking through it.
So is it VDI if you're doing non-composed persistent?
Non-composed, yeah, it's VDI.
Okay. Like just a bunch of virtualized Windows 10 gets to still be VDI?
Yeah, it's persistent VDI.
Okay.
In fact, some of the largest deployments in the world that I've ever seen were actually persistent VDI because they did it before the technology was good enough to do non-persistent VDI. Things like FS Logics were missing at that time, so they have persistent VDI. In fact, XenTegra has probably 40 virtual desktops as a company and there's only one person who actually gets a persistent VDI when they want it, and that's me.
To me, if it's persistent, that doesn't feel very VDI-ish to me, because then you have to get into all the traditional backups and restoration and versioning issues that like virtualized servers need. But
I mean, VDI does not save you from doing everything if you still do it the same way you used to do it. It's just a different hosting platform.
That's a great point. Yeah. If you're doing persistent, right now, you're still doing SCCM and or WSS or whatever, right? And exactly, right? You haven't really changed the game very much.
Right. I still had to be careful with my words there.
Yeah, guys, I've been around this long enough to remember when VMware, like the reason I am in the business I am today is because I went to a VMware user group and Citrix was there presenting about persistent desktops on top of a hypervisor. That is the reason why I'm standing here today, is because those two companies were in the same room talking about how VDI at its infancy is nothing but a Windows workload running in a VM, a Windows desktop client OS running in a VM. That's when VDI started, and I was in the room when it happened, kind of, sort of.
Nice.
No, for sure. I mean, I think that it was. There was a period of time where the whole world had to change its thinking about, yes, I can virtualize this workload, and I think absolutely desktop workloads were some of the lowest hanging fruit. Right? Yeah, they paved the way for a broader, more aggressive mindset of I can virtualize all the way up to my tier 1, tier 0 apps.
Right.
And on that note, you have to take it one little bite at a time. I'm going to have snap. All right. So
now you got to share the video.
Well, yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun. And maybe we will share this one. I don't know.
That wasn't exactly painting a word picture, was it?
It was, right?
Okay.
He's a paid spokesperson now. They just got to pay him.
Most common mistakes, according to this document, at least when it comes to sizing. Number one, lack of context. Leaning on sizing guidelines, scalable numbers without the context of what the actual workload is, what the apps are, when they use it, time frames, that kind of stuff. Any thoughts on not getting the context right when it comes to sizing?
Yes. I mean, the first one that comes to mind when I think about lack of context is, we'll just take what we have built out right now and we'll just build it that way. And lack of context doesn't necessarily just mean the things he described here, but lack of context actually means lack of context, like not having the correct information around what you actually need in order to size it out correctly. Sometimes,
Harvey, going back to the one we mentioned earlier,
sometimes too small.
One we mentioned earlier, where in our sizing guide, it talks about vCPU, and the people we sized it for translated that into CPU and didn't realize that there was some scaling that would go on there when you compare the two. Yes. Next thing you know, they got half as much as they got half as much as we wanted them to get, and they didn't quite understand why, and then they didn't bother to rescope it once they got our information.
No, which was also troubling, but we'll move past that.
Even this, we can all think of times that this was missed as well, starting with a small group of pilot users, right?
Yeah.
Gauging, and the pilot users tell you both how the experience works, right? What's the acceptance like of that? But also reality check your density numbers. Are you able to fit those pilot numbers into as few nodes as you should be able to? If the pilot runs well, but you're using all the nodes you needed for production, stop and check that,
Yeah, I mean, and again, context, right? You got people that'll say, "Oh yeah, these are just Office users. All they use is Microsoft Office and a browser." Okay, well that makes sense. That doesn't sound like a very powerful user. Oh yeah, well what they're doing in the browser is multimedia conferencing and holding meetings and doing presentations with high resolution. It just so happens, oh yeah, now that's a SaaS app and it used to be on-prem. So there's still lots and lots of things that, you would want to get information about. You can't just take it at, oh yeah, they're just using Word in a browser.
Which, by the way, don't underestimate a browser with 15 tabs and a bunch of multimedia going on. That's a massive.
Oh yeah, like is that browser Chrome? Like that has some opinions on resource usage.
Right.
Well, even saying Office these days, like that is not a lightweight app. right? Those days are gone. That was like, XP flavored VDI running like Office 2003. Yeah, that was really easy, wasn't it?
Right.
Yep.
And never underestimate the homegrown apps. We have our own developers, and they've made this app, and this is all we use, and it's browser based. Yeah, that sounds great, but how much
Sure.
is it using resource wise?
Oh yeah, right. Your contact says, oh, they're just they're lightweight users, and in reality, the users are like doing like code compiling. It's like they would not describe themselves as being lightweight, and you're
Well,
Right.
think about
for a mismatch.
Think about JavaScript, right? And offloading that to the endpoint, in that case, the virtual desktop, and how much that's going to require processing in the virtual desktop.
Right.
I will say that in this whole sizing conversation, the hyperconverge and the fact that we have SSD, which if you remember when you first got your first computer, physical laptop, desktop with an SSD drive, how many things that used to be slow got fast. There's a lot of that when you put all this stuff on top of Nutanix that just kind of hides all the bad stuff that you've been dealing with for a bunch of years.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure.
Even interesting how much, I've got to think over the last 20 years, right? Like the rollouts of SSD apps and OSs now are probably less gentle about assuming trips to the disk, right? Because they're like, oh, well, if every desktop now has a single NVMe drive, right? Who cares about I/O? It's like, well, times 10,000 is still a lot of I/O.
Right. Yep.
Mm.
All right. Next section talks about something Harvey's famous for, which is analysis paralysis. Sorry, Harvey.
Yes, guilty.
Well, and so what happens in our world, and I'll go back to the example I gave a while ago about the company that used the big EMC solution. They didn't know, and because they were using 3-tier architecture, they had to over-engineer and then multiply it by 4. That's why they spent so much money on something they were never going to grow into. At some point when you're an engineer or administrator, if you don't have the benefits of, say, something like hyperconverged, then you can make really big mistakes. Because, right, I mean, it's what we do as admins or engineers. We take whatever we need and we make sure we get it right by multiplying it times 2 and spend a bunch of money that we didn't have to spend.
Yep, agreed.
I think even thinking about GPU requirements here that this section talks about is really interesting. That to me is one of the easiest slam dunks for an actual DaaS infrastructure of saying I just rent my VMs by the hour. Putting GPUs in nodes of any flavor, right, Nutanix or otherwise, in a data center is expensive from a acquiring standpoint, power standpoint, sizing standpoint. And then if like you said, Harvey, if we're doing DR, then double all of that compared to,
Right.
No, my users that need GPU rent that by the hour. And then after 8 hours, they clock off, or 6 hours or 10 hours, depending. 6 hours if they're me, 12 if they're Andy. But then I get to quit paying for it, right? I give that whole thing back to the cloud provider, and I'm not paying for that for 12 hours of the day. And I've made a lot of that problem go away, even maybe GPU licensing go away, right? Depending.
Right. Yeah, and it's also amazing how GPU can save a deployment. I mean, just for a lot of people that are undersized, being able to go with GPU can help you with performance, because it's just simply for the fact that it's taking some of those cycles off the CPU and freeing that up for the other people to share resources.
Do you think there's an element of understanding that you're running the software probably, I'm going to say not as intended, that's not the right way to think about it, not as expected, right? They're writing for the 99% use case of this is going to run on a 3-year-old or less laptop with a lot of local CPU, a lot of local GPU. You're going to put it into a virtualized desktop environment for other business benefits and outcomes.
Right.
But you're kind of playing on hard mode around figuring out what does the app need, and am I going to give it enough resources to perform well, right? And you're not going to be in the widest path of what the developers are writing that software to do and how it was going to be used.
Agreed. 100% correct. There are a lot of assumptions that are made on that side of it that, we have to either undo or account for on this side of it. So, sizing is important. I think that's the lesson, and there are 1,000 ways I can beat this to the ground, but I promised when Andy said analysis paralysis, I was going to try to be short, and here I go already.
Well, again, the nice thing about Nutanix and all of this, hyperconverged in general, but Nutanix and all of this is you can get it wrong one way or the other, but the delta in getting it wrong versus what the delta used to be in getting it wrong is much more palatable than it was in the old days, where you either way undersized stuff and paid a fortune to get it right, or oversized stuff and paid a fortune to get it right, but still wrong because you overspent.
Right. Yeah. And it's built to do that. I mean, it's got the scalability, it's got the flexibility, it's got the ability to save you from either of those predicaments that you put yourself in. So yes, it's definitely a good way to go. One of my favorites.
Yeah, I think scalability is far and away probably the best benefit, right? If you don't know how big a regular brick is, you don't know how many you need for your house, right? If you take a lot of time and say, I know how big each one is, then whether I need 4 nodes or 40 nodes to get there, I get the predictability of that scaling out. And it's very easy to do like a small POC back to pilot users, and then know with confidence that you can grow from there. Whereas yeah, I mean, theme of the podcast, right? Sizing is key.
Yep. I'm going to shamelessly steal that later.
That is a good one to use as an example. All right. Next one on the list is sizing based on physical devices. As much as that sounds like a no-brainer, that you would not necessarily make that assumption, we see it all the time. Harvey, thoughts there?
Yeah. It's funny, when we were talking back about number 1, that was one of the things that I brought up. Oh, well, we do it this way right now. We should just do it that way for the future. That does not always make sense. And I would say probably more times than not, it does not make sense, because with physical devices, you are always on purpose trying to make sure that by the end of the life of that physical device, it is still doing what you need. Therefore, on day 1, it is probably much bigger than you need it to be. And so, you're going into it being oversized on purpose so that at the end of it, you won't have a very, very slow machine that's, not able to run the new OS or the new application. So you already know going into it that you're very much oversized.
That's interesting. Yeah, for sure. Right. If your data gathering leads to you thinking you need 8-core virtual desktops and 16 gig memory, like, it's worth doing a triple check on that data for sure. Right.
Right.
But it's interesting to think about. I wonder, that's a great point. Like, the laptop that you're replacing was built to have a 3 to 5 year meaningful life,
right,
running business apps, but you have to buy that up front, has to last for the planned life cycle of the laptop. Compared to, it's interesting thinking about a solution where if these are all desktops as a service in the first place, and I'm renting them maybe by the hour from public cloud, then yeah, maybe in 5 years I'll need more horsepower per user as apps grow, but I don't need that now.
Right.
I'll deploy smaller desktops now, and I can grow even each desktop size as needed.
Yeah, to Andy's earlier point about having to get it right or get it wrong, I mean, doing it through a cloud provider, you only have to get it right for that day. You can change it the next day if that's what you need to do. You just got the ability to go back and do that.
It'll also be interesting to think about. It's probably too much choice to put in front of users, but like, hey, are you having a development day or an email day? We'll give you different desktops based off of what you need here.
Right.
Well, I mean, you kind of can, right? You give them the option when they log into that workspace, if you don't automate it, to let them pick, and then you're watching on the back end and spinning up additional resources, assuming you have resources free to spin up.
Yeah. Have a little shame email, little show back coming up saying, hey, by the way, 80% of your team picked a big desktop today, but isn't using it,
Right.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right. So next line here. Well, hold on, Jirah. You work a lot in the infrastructure side of conversations around Nutanix. Sizing based on the physical in server world is probably more common or more accurate than sizing in the virtual and desktop versus virtual desktop world. Would you agree, or is it the true statement is exactly the same statement as what we made here?
Let me make sure I heard you right. Sizing desktops based off of old physical desktops is as bad as sizing server VMs off of old physical servers?
Well, in the server VM world, you have maybe the ability to base off the physical a little more than you do in the desktop because it's more of a consistent workload, whereas desktops are, up and down, spiky, idling, spiky, idling constantly up and down. It's probably easier to get it right off physical comparisons in the infrastructure side than it is off physical comparisons in the desktop side. Would you agree?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, right. Different dynamics, right? Because with servers, they're probably all on the time, but your CPU heavy hitters are going to move around based off of time of day or day of week or day of month, who's busy and who's not. So that's definitely true. And I think it lends itself to a very interesting analogy, right? Around we didn't start sizing virtual server clusters based off of, well, how big of a physical server was this workload coming from before I virtualized it, right? There was a expected reduction in some efficiency as it got kind of trimmed down and lean and mean. And of course, we'd have to just size for whatever concurrency or 95th percentile as we do that. But as the administrator, you almost it's kind of your financial duty, right, to make sure you're kind of high and tight, but not too tight.
Right.
That's the scalability benefit of, right, is, Nutanix helps you prove, I really need my 11th node or my 12th node now, and the first 10 are really busy, right? Users aren't complaining yet, but we can grow when we need to, but not in advance.
Well, and you're sizing, when you size servers, more than likely you're sizing the server around a known workload. And I'm already stealing Jirah's analogy. You already know what size brick it is, so you're just building the house based on that brick size. So, you're going into it knowing I'm only going to do this much on this server, and you're purposely sizing it for that because you know that you can just scale out if that's what you need to do. But when you look at the physical endpoint from a user standpoint, a laptop, a desktop, something like that, they are not at all the same size bricks. They are not at all sizing around a specific workload. You're just going out to get the biggest and baddest beast that you can get for whatever your budget is. And it's just not the same way in a server workload.
Yeah.
Right. All right, next section here talks about one and done. Conducting sizing analysis once up front, expecting long-term success is just not reality. Populations change, new applications. Really, this goes back to, do the best you can on the front side using tools like Liquidware, Stratosphere, UX, Lakeside, Uber Agent. And then once you get into the virtual world, you need to go back and resize every so often and maybe even do like load testing scenarios. Yeah,
I mean, it's funny. This one kind of goes straight at some of the points we were already talking about. But from a user standpoint, the applications that they use, or, even if the applications are exactly the same and they just get upgraded, like those particular specs and those particular requirements from a user standpoint that they need could literally change once a month. I mean, it's not something where it's going to be the same and continue to be the same over the life of what they're using. I mean, those, as the applications get changed, as they, move from on-prem to SaaS or back to on-prem, or, even something as simple as, now they have an Excel add-in that I can use, that could easily be something that would take more CPU, or, to Jirah's point earlier, being able to use GPU to handle some of these newer style apps that have lots more visualizations and look prettier.
And that literally could be that. Oh, yes, absolutely. That also could be, somebody does a patch to one application over the weekend, and all of a sudden that app does lots of things correctly or incorrectly, then uses more resources, right?
That's
correct. Or we live in a patch that you authorized and rolled out or didn't, right? Like there's lots of stuff that can bypass traditional IT software management life cycles. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we can all think of examples of customers that do this really well, right? That have that sort of permanent pilot group of users, right? That are always running on next month's image,
Absolutely.
Maybe whether they know it or not, right? Maybe there are canaries, even if they don't know they're in our pilot group, but when they call, we know that that's a warning sign about next month's image that will get rolled out. and we handle that differently. So yeah, no, I couldn't agree more about the philosophy of sizing staying a continual practice, right? That you never get to delegate that part of your job as a desktop administrator, virtualized or otherwise.
If you're living in the desktop virtualization world, DaaS world, change control should also include a sizing test every single time. And I'm sure the guys from Login VSI would love to hear us say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very important. I mean, to Andy's point, one little patch over the weekend, you come in and everybody's screaming on Monday morning because what was fine on Friday from a CPU spec performance is no longer fine on Monday after that patch. And you're not rolling back that patch because it was, to mitigate a 0-day attack that's been getting hit by everybody around, around the corporate world, and blah 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 blah. Like the situations are endless, but you need to be able to make sure that you got to be able to get it right for just that day. And if you miss it on Monday, well, you better have it on Tuesday. Really, you better have it before lunch on Monday, but we won't get into that.
Right.
Everything is a now, right?
Absolutely.
All right, next one here is an interesting topic, and it is taking the application vendor specs as face value versus doing your own testing. Agreed. Look, the vendors only know what they know from what testing they've done. If they've done any, they may just take their physical recommendations and dump it into the virtual world and expect it to work. Certainly you want to do like we were just talking about, test during, before, during, and after the implementation.
Right. And, just a healthy being able to take things with a grain of salt. From a vendor perspective, they are charged with making sure that their application works on reasonable specs, right? So, what they are putting forth as their minimum specs are just that, a minimum. You should definitely be testing and make sure that what they think is okay from a minimum spec is actually the type of user experience that you want to provide for your users, because I'm willing to bet those numbers don't match in all cases.
Oh, but I think I read it and go the opposite way, right? Their minimum might not be a realistic minimum, right? You should be validating if they say they need 4 vCPUs. Yeah, but how's it run on 3? How does it run on 2? Do I accept that kind of performance, right? Because their number is going to have some amount of insurance baked into it, either for allowing for different concurrency, a worse vCPU ratio, contention within the VM for scheduling, future updates, right? We don't need those megahertz this year, but maybe in 2 future releases we will. I think you're qualifying. Are their numbers too high? Potentially.
Yeah, so I'll make you laugh. Back to one of Andy's questions a little bit ago. I bet that answer changes when you're talking about the user experience in the desktop world versus something that's being installed server side.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, taking a page out of servers, right? Think about 15 years ago, right? We're rolling out our first, virtualized servers, on vSphere. How many apps said, well, we wanted a single 8-core socket when it was physical, so give me 8 vCPUs now. And,
right.
And the right answer is, well, prove to me you need them. If you do, you get them. If you don't, you don't, so.
Yeah, I would wager to bet that it's oversized in the server world and undersized in the desktop world.
Yeah.
Potentially, yeah, for sure.
Well, and the reason why it's undersized in the desktop world gets to number 6, and that's because people think that desktop virtualization automatically is going to save them money. It does if you can factor in CapEx and OpEx, but if you're just focused on CapEx savings, you might have come to the wrong party.
Right. It's the question is, does working smarter save you money? Right. And the answer absolutely should be yes. Right. Because what do you get back in terms of your days and nights and weekends and time to go do other things? Right. I've yet to meet a team that had an empty task list, an empty project list. Right. There's always this project you never get to. What if working smarter lets you get farther down the project list?
Right. For sure. I mean, that's one of the things that I talk about a lot with with people overall. I mean, and you guys have heard me say it before, right? Nutanix for your sanity. Your sanity is actually worth something, people.
Oh, I'm stealing
nobody
that.
else concentrates on it, but we do. At least I do.
I'm stealing that. Well, and it's funny, the focus of this one is cost. And to what you were saying, Harvey, about software vendors, right? Their mindset, it's almost your job to be in a different mindset, right? Their job is to publish a spec that lets the software perform, and your job as the customer or the administrator of the software is to find the spec that lets it perform at the right cost for the business. If maybe there's trade-offs to be made, risks to be accepted,
right?
Running it under spec, but we get these other savings out of it.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's certainly a conversation. And now, just in general, though, hyperconverged has made it so where there is an opportunity for additional cost savings, especially if you can quantify and qualify where hyperconverged is going to save you in just desktop administration, the infrastructure side of it.
Yeah, we've had customers, on Nutanix long enough now that their 5-year hardware life cycle, right, is sort of coming up, and they're looking at a refresh. And one of my favorite things about Nutanix that we talked about it for a long time, but now we're finally seeing it sort of in the field as customers own it for long enough, is year 5, year 6, it's order new nodes, probably smaller nodes because they do more per node now, expand the first cluster, eject the older nodes, and there is no migration, right? It just sorts itself out. It's you move to the new house without ever renting the moving truck, hiring the guys, packing everything up, unpacking it when you get there. Your old house becomes your new house as you sleep.
Right. And I mean, for those of you who have either done a complete lift and shift or, gone through a hard migration where you're having to replace every single thing, there are costs behind that too. Those things need to be quantified and qualified to Andy's point. But, you can't just look at just day one. You kind of have to look at the full life cycle. There are plenty of ways in which you will reduce costs, but don't try to save it just on day one. There are lots of things between day one and the end of year 5 in ways that you can reduce costs.
So number 7 goes to optimizing the image. I mean, there was a point in time where you had to know like this 400-page document from Citrix or VMware on how to do it. Now the optimizers from those companies do most of it for you. I made a joke probably before you got on, Harvey, about having to uninstall or disable Candy Crush. The first version of Enterprise that came out included Candy Crush for whatever reason. But the optimization, just the basic optimizations that you can still find in several guides, and as well as various tools that are out there, those will go a long way. And that's a default that should be followed from an operational efficiency as well as a security perspective. And if you're not doing that, then go back and do it, or make sure you think about doing it in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, one of the very first, when Citrix started publishing their tool, one of the very first things that it did is go in, Windows 10 and disable all the prettiness while you're moving your window, or when you click the menu button and it fades in instead of just popping in. Little things like that cost you performance in it. You may think, oh, well, that's, not causing me a whole lot. Well, it is when you're doing that across 3,000 users. Just a little 1% CPU save across 3,000 people just it becomes a bigger deal when you look at it that way. So,
right. Jirah, I think you mentioned earlier, you've probably been around some of this in your Nutanix travels. Probably not what you think first and foremost, but it's kind of a no-brainer, right? That there's things that are just in the physical world that don't belong in the virtual world.
Completely agree. Things that exist in the base OS that don't belong in a production environment. Yeah, for sure.
Screensaver.
Yeah, right. Exactly. No, completely agree. This to me falls into the category of things that I know you need to do to be doing it correctly. but I defer to you guys from the expertise of like this tool versus that tool and how often. For sure, I know you need to go to your doctor regularly and get checked up. I'm not the doctor, so I'm gonna defer there for sure. But no, I couldn't agree more. It's critical. When I as the SE, right, have to represent the solution of, we're going to represent this solution, this configuration for your VDI environment, and I know that the partner has done fantastic sizing and data collection, and they're going to do optimization for the deployment. Man, it's 99% stress removed from proposing that, compared to if they're like, no, we're running this old VDI image, it's Windows 7, it's XP, we're going to move it over and then we'll upgrade one day. It's like, I know I'm going to get calls about this eventually on a long enough timeline. Something's going to change here meaningfully enough, and people have expectations of there's just magic in the system that will sort that out. It's like, no, this is, you need the right hands on the steering wheel.
That's exactly right. I mean, as the person charged with being the magic,
yeah, right.
You got to make sure that you're actually taking these things into account and actually looking at it and optimizing and doing everything you can to make sure that, by the third week, fourth week, when you start getting everybody on, and, once your users get comfortable with it, once they've learned what they needed to learn as far as getting in and access and, doing what they need to do from there, as soon as they learn how to do exactly what they need to do, then it goes into doing exactly what they want to do. And if you're not optimized the best way you can, then as soon as they start doing what they want to do, you feel it.
Yeah, the magic is in that line on the quote that says discovery, architecture, design, and knowledge transfer for your team. That's where the magic is, right?
That's right. You are exactly right.
Yeah, I had a guy recently tell me that the story about a plumber who charged $10,000 for a visit and only took 10 minutes. And the guy's like, well, I don't want to pay $10,000. Well, you only here for 10 minutes. I know, but it's the knowledge that you're paying the $10,000 for, not the
right.
Not the amount of time I was here.
Because otherwise you pay the other guy $5,000. He comes and he's there for 3 weeks, and then he's got to come back in 2 weeks for another $5,000. Could have saved yourself time.
Well, I love our customers. I love all of our customers equally, I'm sure. But it's like the plumber that has the rate of like, it's $100 an hour. If you want to tell me what to do, it's $120 an hour. If I have to listen to how I should do it and do it your way, it's $150 an hour,
I've seen that somewhere. I don't remember where, but I remember seeing something like that.
All right. And the final one talks about putting all your eggs in one basket. You got the rise of the public cloud, I think, or clouds. I like to use the word clouds, plural, when I talk about cloud. But, the idea that maybe you have some catalogs in the on-premises world on hyperconverged. Maybe you have, some in the cloud. Maybe you use Nutanix clusters and on-premises Nutanix, and you can go back and forth between the two. I think the idea here is, try it a little both, do some testing against both, figure out what works at any point in time for your users, but don't think that one size fits all.
Right. And don't think that just because you're using, one cloud region, just because you're using public cloud, even, if you're just using one cloud region, you're still susceptible to things. You want to make sure that, you're using multiple regions or multiple clouds or multiple data centers, one on-prem, one cloud. The things that were true about running things on-prem and having DR or having a secondary data center, all of those things are still true when you start talking about public cloud. I know that they have resiliency built into the clouds. Lots of you have resiliency built into your primary data center. But you still, that still doesn't survive a tornado or a torpedo or a missile or something like that. You still want to be able to have that flexibility to continue running if something happens to that first basket of eggs.
I would love to hear more from Harvey about how to torpedo-proof my service offering. That sounds really interesting. But Harvey, it sounds like you're saying I still need like a disaster recovery plan.
Yes.
My desktop server in the cloud. What?
Yeah.
That is not what the brochure said. That doesn't make any sense at all. No, for sure, right? And especially leveraging public cloud, right? If that's the right fit for your workloads, is the easiest way to have disaster recovery, right? You can have so little data over in some other availability zone or group, and be able to turn that into a running instance on demand. It's such a powerful offering, right? People often forget that or don't plan for that. I was reading something that talked about you need a ransomware handling and recovery plan the way you need a disaster recovery plan, right? Like
Yes.
treat ransomware as a type of disaster, put it in the book, make sure that the most junior guy in IT can execute all of the procedures in the book. 100%, right? It's
Exactly.
as usual with disaster planning, right? It's always a failure of imagination, right? Not a failure of technology normally that leaves you bit.
And it is never if, it is when.
Right. Yeah, I had a friend who was into reading about accident investigation and probabilities, right? And he's like, if it happens once every 10,000 whatevers, that means it happens 20 times a day. It's rare for you. It's not rare in general.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point too. Lots of people rest on something like that. Oh, well, mean time between failures is, 7 years. Well, that's great. That means somebody was 14 and somebody was 1.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, guys, that gets us to the end of this one, and we're right at the end of time. I reached out to Ruben on LinkedIn, and maybe we'll get him to join us for part 2. We'll keep an eye out for that. This was great, and for our listeners, especially the ones that come from the Citrix or the VMware Horizon world, probably made a lot of sense. And for those that don't, there's probably still a lot of carryovers between this topic and just Nutanix implementations and sizing in general.
Absolutely.
So, guys, I guess with that, we'll wrap this one up. Harvey, Jirah, thanks for joining again, and we'll do it again next Monday. And honestly, I just love doing this with you guys. It's such a learning opportunity for me, and to be able to hear other people talk about the things that I have conversations with myself in the shower on, and out for runs or whatever else. It's nice just to be able to talk to a friend.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is definitely fun and good to bounce things off of other people.
Well, with that, guys, we'll wrap it up and we'll do it again next week. Thank you.
All right.
Cool. Talk to y'all next week.